Five Nights at Freddy's has its fair share of jump scares. They're a core part of the franchise, with every single installment in the series having at least one section where one of the animatronics attempts to startle you. A few years ago, I made a video discussing how fast you could get jump scared in a variety of FNaF games, and I would advise you to watch it beforehand if it wasn't for the fact that it was absolutely riddled with mistakes, from using the wrong strategies, relying on RNG, and straight up not even including FNaF 3 because I didn't own the game at the time. Though surely nobody's gonna end up watching the video anyways. I mean, I've made so many different mistakes, there's just no way that it ends up getting that many views. Holy shit! Needless to say, I'm here to make amends for my mistakes, and I've decided to go on and do my research to find the fastest possible way to get jump scared in all 14 Five Nights at Freddy's games. I'll start off with the slowest of the bunch and slowly make my way to the number 1 spot. And trust me, some of the times here are absolutely absurd, so you might want to stick around for that. With all of that said though, it's finally time to answer the question, how fast can you get jump scared in every FNaF game? But before we get into our list of times, it's best to give you a quick rundown of how the rules for this challenge are gonna work. I'll try not to take too long though. In fact, let's make a quick speedrun out of it. Timer starts in 3, 2, 1, and go. Basically, every run I'm going to show you is gonna start as soon as the player gains control of themselves in game, like at the start of 12 AM on FNaF 1. I'll get into how other runs start once we get to their respective games, but most of them will follow this trend except for the Help Wanted series, as their timers start once the player has begun one of the available minigames. The runs are also going to start on the brand new save file as if you had just opened the game for the first time, but I'm not going to count events like the first minigame in Pizzeria Sim, or the introductory cutscenes in the latest games. And lastly, any secret screen like the Eyeless Bonnie from FNaF 1 or Springtrap trying to leave the suit in FNaF 3, which have a 1 in 1,000 chance of spawning once you boot up the game, will also not be counted for runs, as they would technically occur before the player had even started in the first place. And that's time. Pretty good run if you ask me. But without further ado, I think now's the best time to reveal the slowest game when it comes to jump scaring the player. And that title goes to... FNaF's Sister Location. Listen, are any of you really surprised? Sister Location is pretty different from most other games, having a relatively different style in contrast to the office-based gameplay. So it's fair to assume that getting jump scared in it would also end up taking a good bit, as the first interaction with an actual enemy only occurs on the second night of the game, where you have to repeatedly close a gate in order to stop these tiny creatures known as Biddy Babs from killing you. Regardless though, we still have to use a couple of strats to save as much time as possible. First of all, we're gonna take advantage of a technique that can be used to skip dialogue segments, as the start of the game is riddled with yapping until night 2. The first FNaF games were made using a software called ClickTeam, and this specific engine has a pretty neat keyboard shortcut that can be used to our advantage, that being Ctrl-S. This shortcut will immediately mute any audio track that's currently playing in the game, which allows you to save a huge amount of time as it snowballs throughout the nights. In fact, most speedruns of Sister Location make use of this strat by muting the dialogue as soon as it starts, and I actually based the fastest possible time off of the start of the current any % record, which is held by Frozen Fungi with a 20-minute 31-second run. Their first night is pretty solid, with them finishing it in about 2 minutes and 5 seconds, skipping any dialogue they come across. They also make good use out of the F2 strategy I've previously mentioned. Quick side note, I haven't really talked about this strat yet because the game following Sister Location was meant to be the slowest, and since it used the same time save, I have it explained there first. Don't worry though, as I'll be sure to talk about it once we're done here. But anyways, let's get back into our run. They then make it to the Biddy Bab enclosure at around the 440 mark, and while the creatures do take a tiny bit until they start attacking, they eventually grab the door about 5 minutes and 45 seconds in, with it taking an additional 5 seconds to finally end your run, giving us a total time of 5 minutes and 50 seconds, making it the absolute slowest title in the series. With that out of the way though, let's move on to game number 13. Yup, turns out that the one game I forgot to include last time ends up being one of the slowest in the series, and there's a pretty reasonable explanation for it. See, FNaF 3's first night isn't like any of its predecessors, because you have absolutely no threats regardless of what you do. No Springtrap, no Phantoms, no nothing. But there's actually a pretty interesting strategy involved in our run nonetheless. Basically, as soon as the player reaches the end of the night, instead of having to wait out the 6 AM screen and the following minigame, you could instead press the F2 key, and it would immediately teleport you back to the main menu, skipping a pretty big portion of the run by just clicking continue from night 2, which, speaking of, requires a pretty lucky event to occur in order to get Jumpscared as quickly as possible. If you're thinking that Springtrap would be the main antagonist of this run, you'd be mistaken, as it is actually Phantom Foxy that can scare you the fastest. Foxy has about a 1 in 1,000 chance to appear in the office once the player flips the monitor on night 2, so the ideal way to go about this part of the run would be to instantly flip the cameras and have Foxy jumpscare us right afterwards. Now, to sum things up with their respective times, night 1 would take about 3 minutes and 53 seconds, then an extra 4.5 seconds to exit to the menu and press night 2, and roughly 3 more seconds to open cams and get jumpscared by Foxy, giving us a total time of about 3 minutes and 58 seconds, which is honestly faster than I thought. But times are bound to get way quicker as we get into the next few games. Trust me. So, moving on to a pretty recent release in comparison to the previous entries, Into the Pit also takes its fair share of time to jumpscare you, with the first possible opportunity to do so occurring once Oswald, the main character, makes his way into the party room located inside of the pizzeria after following the yellow rabbit while looking for his friends. Entering the room reveals the fate of 6 children who got caught by the rabbit, and once he spots you, the player is thrown into a QuickTime event. And I'm guessing you can figure out what happens if you fail it. Our run starts as soon as the player takes control of Oswald, and I'll be honest with you guys, it really isn't all that interesting on its own. There's a lot of mashing keys to skip dialogue, completing minigames, going into the Freddy suit for hide and seek, and then making it to the party room once the lights go out. The speedrun I'm going to base myself off of for this jumpscare percent is the current record for the fastest ending in the game, which is owned by runner TomicVic with a 304. This ending consists in the player going through the game as usual until they're able to leave the pizzeria after hide and seek, which is pretty short in comparison to other speedruns. TomicVic makes it through the first segment of the game relatively quickly, completing every minigame and running back to the main entrance roughly 2 minutes and 50 seconds in, where they then proceed to leave as to get the ending in world record time. But our run doesn't really end here, as we instead have to venture into the pizzeria and reach the party room as fast as possible. From what I can tell, it would usually take you an additional 50 seconds to get to the party room and fail the QuickTime event. Regardless, that leaves us with a final time of about 3 minutes and 40 seconds to get jumpscared, which is a pretty similar time to FNaF 3. But the run I'm going to show you next actually ends up being a whole 2 minutes faster, and mind you that we're not even in the top 10 yet, so let's get into it.
When you can see, how fast can you flee? When you can see, how fast can you flee?
So let's take a step back and return to some of the older FNaF games. FNaF World was released almost a decade ago, and it wasn't anything like the previous games, opting for an RPG-styled experience in comparison to the mascot horror genre. And while the game mainly focuses on being this cutesy and cozy experience, it does have at least a singular jump scare. Let me explain. On May 13th, 2016, Scott released Update 1.2 to the public, which added a ton of extra features to the game, most notably the Halloween update backstage, a relatively secret area where you could play different minigames and unlock up to 8 new characters. Among the many minigames that were introduced in the update, there was Foxy.exe, which is actually pretty strange. The player controls a model of Bonnie that goes through 3 different levels in a pretty unsettling area with Withered Foxy in the background. The first level is devoid of any major threats, but the second one has you dodge a PNG of Withered Freddy, and if you fail to do so in time, Foxy shows up on your screen and plays the FNaF 2 Jumpscare audio. This speedrun is pretty interesting, as you can actually reach the Halloween area by a secret path that's relatively close to spawn, having you clip through some trees and eventually teleport to the backstage. The run I've chosen to follow for this route is a 9:41 for the Chica's Magic Rainbow ending, performed by Dark SR, as it is one of the fastest to reach Foxy EXE from the very beginning. While the timer does start slightly earlier for them, I've chosen to kick off the run once the player gains control of Freddy for the very first time. Dark ends up getting to the Halloween area and starting Foxy.exe about 37 seconds in, and switching over to a simulation I did, I managed to get jump scared on level 2 in around 54 seconds, adding up to a total time of 1 minute 31. Another massive leap given how we're just 4 games in, and it's surprisingly close to the time I got on my previous video. But things get pretty unhinged from here, especially with this next title coming up. Now, assuming that I won't take months to upload this video, Secret of the Mimic is the latest game to come out of the franchise, and now I'd be lying to you if I said this game didn't have the wildest strategy out of any other title in this list. And just to throw this out there, the actual speedrun for this game has turned hours upon hours of gameplay into a run that can be performed in less than a minute. Funnily enough, the jumpscare percent actually takes longer than that, but it does use a pretty similar strategy. So let me try my best to explain to you how this run would turn out. Though before we get into that, I wanted to thank fellow runner Rifty for inadvertently making a full speedrun of this category that I just so happened to come across while researching for a potential strat, as well as giving me unlisted videos with even better times. Like, genuinely, this helped out a ton. But anyways, let's get started. The run starts off as normal as the player arrives to the abandoned workshop and grabs the data diver. They then perform a trick by walking backwards in order to skip the animation of opening the door, and after carefully positioning themselves in between it, they press crouch to make their way on top of the van. From then on, most of the strategies used are extremely complicated. You first have to set your game to 30 FPS, and then perform a deload, which removes the assets of the place you're currently at in-game. Rifty then has to keep pausing until the welcome showroom is loaded off in the distance, and then proceed to move forward whilst the game reloads some of its assets until they're inside of the facility, where they successfully make their way into one of the final rooms in the game, skipping literal hours worth of gameplay. According to Rifty, there's a specific trigger that can be accessed to spawn an enemy to jumpscare you, which would usually be skipped in the current any percent as to avoid losing your run. But we're here to try and die as quickly as possible, so after loading the map, Rifty makes their way into said enemy and ends up getting jump scared by a microwave? Honestly, given everything that I just explained, I'm not even surprised anymore. So this run is unlike anything you're gonna see in this video. Well, maybe it can rival Security Breach, but we'll get to that in a second. It's also pretty difficult to explain, so I hope I did enough justice to try and justify what was happening at all times. I'll also be sure to include Rifty's explanation of the run in the description, as it carefully explains each and every step of the current any percent speedrun, so I definitely recommend you give it a watch. Regardless, Rifty's jumpscare speedrun ends at about 1 minute and 10 seconds while accounting for the time spent in the pause menu. And while things might not get any crazier than this when it comes to strategies, the times do get way lower as we move further into the top 10. Security Breach, a game I've talked about quite a bit on this channel, and while most of the community isn't too happy with how it turned out, I still have a soft spot for it nonetheless, due to how fun it is to break the game in many different ways. In my old video, I claimed that Security Breach was the second slowest game of them all when it came to getting jump scared, with a final time of around 7 minutes and 48 seconds, but I clearly underestimated how much faster this time could get, and that's when I found an interesting category. See, the website speedrun.com has an additional page for Security Breach called Category Extensions. Instead of regular speedruns where you try to reach the ending as quickly as possible, there's a ton of joke categories like Woman%, where you try to get jump scared by Vanessa as rapidly as you can, or even Map%, where the goal is to take a map from Mapbot in the fastest possible time. And among these joke submissions, there is Death%. The fastest way to die in Security Breach is obtainable on patch 1.11 by going out of bounds, and the current world record is owned by a runner named Zach with an insane run that lasts less than 60 seconds. The speedrun itself is actually pretty chaotic. The player starts by muting the dialogue audio before beginning their attempt, as doing so in this patch would immediately skip any cutscene due to there being no audio tracks, as you can see by the subtitles. After exiting the stomach hatch, Zach makes their way into a very specific spot in Freddy's room, where they then proceed to perform what's known as a wedge jump to get on top of the map. If you haven't watched my previous video on Security Breach speedruns, just know that by repeatedly jumping in between the hitboxes of two different objects at a very specific angle, you can actually climb upwards and make your way out of bounds. With this trick in mind, Zach finds themselves atop of Rockstar Row, and they then proceed to do some routing until they reach Chica's room in order to claim a party pass, which would usually be locked until you had made a good bit of progress in the game. Once this party pass is collected, the player would usually have to find a recharge station in order to escape from Moon. But since the game gets really confused on why you have claimed it without even finishing the tutorial, Moon will instantly spawn on top of you and end your run. Zach managed to execute all of the tricks in their speedrun and finish the jump scare % with a final time of roughly 53.8 seconds, which is genuinely insane for a game of this size. But what if I told you that Security Breach's DLC is actually even faster? And unlike its main game, it doesn't even require any major strategies. Let me explain. Ruin is considered by many to be a huge step up from its original game, and while it does have an overall scarier atmosphere, how good is it at jump scaring the player? Well, it actually ends up beating Security Breach by a matter of seconds, but what I've decided to count as an actual jump scare might be a little controversial. Ruin has a ton of subtle scares scattered throughout the first chapter of the game, and among those events, there's this specific staff bot jumping at you at the very beginning. Now, staff bots do count as an animatronic in my book, and while some might disagree with this take, I'd still classify it as somewhat of a jump scare. With that in mind, our run consists in having the player enter the pizzaplex, find a flashlight, get to the second floor of the lobby, and be greeted by the staff bot. Pretty straightforward in comparison to the previous games. The run I chose to use for this speedrun is the fastest completion of the first chapter in the game in the out of bounds category, owned by Gavin with a 648. They start the run on top of the entrance of the pizzaplex, and then perform a tiny wedge jump in order to skip the cutscene with Cassie once she drops down the ladder, which ends up saving about 20 seconds. They then go through the beginning as quickly as possible, utilizing a trick called sprint jumping to save a bit of stamina instead of having it run out. Sprint jumping is performed by starting to run, pressing jump, and then immediately letting go of the sprint key in order to preserve momentum whilst not draining any excess stamina in the process. Afterwards, they grab a flashlight, make their way up, and end up getting jump scared by the staff bot around 50 seconds in, ending the run with a pretty impressive time despite having a relatively simple run. But things aren't going to stay that way for long though, as this next title requires quite a bit of game knowledge to execute. Pizzeria Sim is another standout in terms of its gameplay, having two completely different sections in the form of a restaurant management simulator, as well as the classic night in the office against a plethora of animatronics. And surprisingly enough, calculating how long it takes you to get jump scared actually takes a significant amount of time to learn, as you need to know a fair share of information regarding the animatronics and how they act at night. When I made the first version of this video, I actually ended up having to play out the game normally until I got to the first salvage section with Molten Freddy, having him jump scare me afterwards. But I got a pretty helpful comment from a user named the Axolotl Enthusiast, in which they said, "I feel like Pizza Sim could be faster. If you get liability on the first day and then get lucky enough, an animatronic can enter the building on night 1. Turns out that you can actually buy a marked down version of the ball pit on the very first day, and doing so will make it so that Molten Freddy, who would otherwise appear in the first salvage segment of the game, would be allowed to spawn in on the very first night, which is a pretty rare event on its own. But this is where things get a bit tricky, as we have to look into how Molten Freddy's AI works during the night segment. Every animatronic in Pizza Sim has a 1 in 3 chance to change rooms every time they receive a movement opportunity. These occur every 8 seconds on the very first night, and they work by selecting a number from 1 to 3 on each time interval. If the number selected is correct, they will successfully move to a different spot, and if it isn't, they'll consequently fail that movement opportunity, having to wait an additional 8 seconds to try again. Every animatronic starts out at a random spot in the top row of the map, and will then try to make their way into the office to jump scare the player. But there's a pretty interesting mechanic that not too many people talk about. If Molten Freddy ends up entering the top middle room after 10 seconds have gone by in the night, which would take 2 movement opportunities, or 16 seconds, they will immediately be teleported to the room right next to the player's office. Afterwards, they would only need to succeed 2 extra opportunities, jump scaring the player pretty effectively. With that knowledge in mind, let's take a look at the total time. Assuming the timer started once the player could control what to purchase in the Pizzeria Simulator, it would take them about 10 seconds to buy the ball pit, place it, and then rapidly head to the office to start the night section. Assuming Molten Freddy had perfect luck, it would take an additional 32 seconds to get jump scared as quickly as possible, giving us a final time of around 42 seconds, which is way faster than what I originally attempted in my previous video. But with Pizza Sim out of the way, I think it's time to talk about an easier strategy as we move on to the number 6 spot.
Jesus. Okay, so the first night is never usually that bad in any of the games, so I'll play through. Fuck! What the fuck? Oh!
So, this is a quick one. FNaF 4 could be argued as one of the scariest games in the franchise, but how fast could you actually lose in it? Well, it turns out that the fastest strategy is surprisingly similar to the one I used in my previous video, which ended up making it the second fastest game to get jump scared in at the time. Though, it still ended up receiving a couple of tweaks. Let me explain. On my previous video, I went through FNaF 4 relatively quickly by going through the first cutscene of the game, then getting into night 1, and immediately looking back at the bed and shining my flashlight at it, as doing so for roughly 15 seconds will make Nightmare Foxy attack the player, instantly ending their run. But what I didn't account for was the fact that you can actually skip the starting cutscene by selecting the continue button in the main menu instead of pressing new game. Afterwards, all that really needs to be done is to face the bed, turn on your flashlight, and wait for Foxy to jump at you, finishing our run in a whopping 16 seconds. But before we move on to the next game, I quickly wanted to address the comments saying that there was a faster route by running against one of the doors, closing it, and then opening it again, as doing so would allegedly greet you with a jump scare in a quicker period of time. And that strategy would be slightly faster on any other night if it weren't for the fact that no animatronics are active until 2 AM, making this strategy impossible to take advantage of on the very first night. But I do appreciate those who brought it up nonetheless. With all of that said, it's finally time to get into the top 5. If you thought that the previous games were getting way shorter, just know that this one isn't any different. The second installment in this series is known to get extremely chaotic as you reach the final nights and extra challenges, having you deal with over 10 different animatronics at once. Despite that though, things start off in a pretty calm manner for night 1, and that's where I've decided to pull a trick up my sleeve. If you're familiar with how FNaF 2 plays out, you've most likely heard of Shadow Bonnie, or RXQ. No, I'm not spelling any of that. RXQ is a secret character that was originally meant to have a 1 in 1 million chance to spawn once the player flipped the monitor, but due to how the game's engine calculates RNG, the chance ended up being lowered to about a 1 in 16,384. And I'm pretty sure you know where I'm going with this. Our player running Jumpscare % could hypothetically get insanely lucky to the point where all they needed to do was flip the monitor once and have RXQ spawn in their office, ending their run in about 5.5 seconds, as Shadow Bonnie takes its fair share of time until they quote-unquote jumpscare you. I say this because all they really do is crash the game, as they don't actually have a jumpscare animation. Regardless of that fact though, I still consider Shadow Bonnie's appearance to count as a scare due to how startling it is having them show up in the office out of nowhere. Setting that dilemma aside though, it's time to move on to a relatively new title with a pretty distinct gameplay loop. Help Wanted 2 is the second VR installment in the series, with its gameplay being pretty different from what we're used to. Instead of having a main game where you have to complete a variety of tasks in order to reach the end, it is instead split into many different minigames related to previous titles in the series, like Sister Location, Pizzeria Sim, and even Security Breach and Ruin, while also introducing many different characters and locations, adding up to a pretty fulfilling experience. Though, if you were to start on a fresh copy of the game, how quickly could we find ourselves getting killed by an animatronic? Well, the answer is actually quite simple, and it's also pretty fun to execute in my opinion. As I stated in the rules, the timing for the Help Wanted game starts upon the player initiating a minigame, and out of the ones that are initially unlocked once you start off, I found the most efficient one to be Balora's Gallery on the Sister Location folder. This minigame simply requires you to crawl across Balora's room while staying away from her path as she dances around you, dodging a few other enemies along the way. But what if instead of carefully traversing across the gallery, our player instead decided to just sprint their way into getting jump scared? According to my calculations, attempting to crawl as quickly as possible across the gallery would result in you getting caught by Balora in around 4 to 5 seconds, which is just absolutely insane. Funnily enough, it was actually Markiplier of all people who had a run I could base myself off of for this jumpscare %, as he attempted to run through the gallery in his very first video on the game. Although, he did end up taking slightly longer to get jumpscared, so I still think the final time could have been lowered if he hadn't stopped at the very end. And that's pretty much all you need to know when it comes to our strategy in this game. And with that in mind, our time has finally come to reveal the top 3. If you told me the first FNaF game would have ended up going from second to last in my previous video, all the way to ranking just seconds away from the number 1 spot, I'll be honest, I would have probably believed you. Despite it being the very first title in the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise, and serving as one of the major kickstarters of mascot horror as a genre, the first FNaF game can actually jumpscare you pretty quickly, and like its sequel, its strategy also ends up taking advantage of a secret character, which you can probably name if you have any basic knowledge of how the first game plays out. Golden Freddy is FNaF's first ever major Easter egg, having about a 1 in 32,768 chance of spawning once the player checked on camera 2B, which when triggered would have this normal looking Freddy poster turn into a close-up of the yellow bear's face. Afterwards, Golden Freddy would spawn inside of the player's office, and if they didn't flip up the monitor in time, they would be greeted with a still frame of his hollow eyes, along with a game crash a couple of seconds later. Our strategy for this game comes down to having absolutely insane RNG once again, as it is hypothetically possible to get jump scared at the very start of the first night. The run would start with our player immediately flipping cams and selecting to be in the first second of the night, and if they got lucky enough, Golden Freddy would be ready to jump scare them as soon as they closed their monitor, which would give us an estimate of about 3 seconds. Though, while it could be argued that a theoretically faster time could be achieved by doing the 1987 combination on the custom night, it would unfortunately require us to use cheat codes that swinlock night 7 sooner, which I've decided to ban from this challenge entirely. Anyways, let's make way to the second fastest game. Despite not including help wanted in my last video due to me not owning the game at the time, you can actually get jump scared unbelievably fast. And I'll be honest, it's gonna be kinda difficult to give you guys a detailed description of how this run works due to how quick and simple it really is. Regardless, I'll still try my best to provide some sort of commentary. But anyways, let's get straight into it. Help Wanted begins by allowing you to play a variety of different minigames, going from re-experiencing the nights of the first 3 titles in a VR perspective, all the way to doing maintenance tasks like repairing the ventilation system. But the one that I found to be the most efficient at getting you killed as quickly as possible is actually the first minigame in Parts and Service, that being Bonnie's. The Parts and Service category consists of the player repairing all 4 animatronics from the very first game, where each and every mistake can send you back to the game over screen. Bonnie's minigame requires you to tune his guitar by accessing the harmonization module located inside of his face. Seems easy enough, right? I mean, how is there even any leeway to get jump scared in it? Well, remember how I just brought up the fact that any small inaccuracy could end up costing you the run? And let me tell you how we could use that to our advantage. The game wants you to be extremely precise. So much so that it starts off by having you take out Bonnie's left eye and then allowing you to remove the other one. If we were to instead take out Bonnie's right eye at the very beginning, the player would immediately be met with an eyeless Bunny jump scare, ending the run in quite literally less than a second. With that knowledge in mind, I decided to boot up the game and do some attempts of my own. And assuming our timer started once the player was ready to repair Bonnie, doing all of the events I've previously mentioned would end up with me getting jump scared in less than half a second, which is absolutely absurd. And the craziest part of it all is that there's still a single game that can somehow get you killed in a shorter period of time. So ladies, gentlemen, and everyone in between, here's to the fastest game you can get jump scared in all of Five Nights at Freddy's. So, 13 games later, we've finally done it. Ultimate Custom Night is the absolute fastest game when it comes to jump scaring the player, and the strategy involved in it is actually pretty hilarious. So, let me break it down for you. As you know, UCN has a roster of over 50 animatronics to fend off against, with its hardest challenge being 50-20 mode, having each and every animatronic active throughout the night on their max difficulty level. I'm sure that most, if not all of you have gotten jump scared in a matter of seconds upon trying this game mode, as there's a huge number of threats that need to be taken care of at the very start of the night. On my last video, UCN ended up placing first when it came to jump scaring the player, but the strategy I ended up using was not fully optimized. After initiating 50-20, I ended up hovering my mouse in the middle of the screen, as Nightmare Eon can jump scare the player in less than a second if they don't move their cursor away from his location. The final time I ended up getting was a solid 0.9 seconds, but there were slightly faster ways to achieve this goal. Under the video's comments section, people suggested many different strats, like changing the music playing in the kitchen to get jump scared by Chica in half a second, but I ended up getting reminded of a different route that I had accidentally triggered on a previous video of mine. See, if you happen to be a subscriber to this channel, chances are you've probably seen my most popular video, where I ranked animatronics to see which one would take the longest to jump scare me, and ranked 13 out of 50, there was Mr. Hippo. Mr. Hippo seems like the average animatronic at first, but his jump scare is unlike any other. If he made his way into your office, you would be met with 3 whole minutes worth of unskippable dialogue, with him going on about random stories for what feels like an eternity. And to add on top of that, there is literally no way to skip it whatsoever without the usage of codes. Now, why am I bringing all of this up? Well, if you were to get jump scared by Mr. Hippo and then try to press F2 as to head back to the main menu, the game would immediately force you to listen to his speech for a second time, ending your current run in an astonishing 0 seconds. Yeah, I'm not joking. It turns out that the game really wants you to listen to Hippo's speech, going as far as to completely break the game in order for you to sit there and wait it out. And while it could be argued that this is technically against the rules, since it requires you to start the game a second time in order to finish the run, I would still consider this to be the absolute quickest route to get killed in all 5 Nights at Freddy's. It's crazy to think that such a silly little feature would end up being the deciding factor in this entire ranking. And if you still think it doesn't really count, then fine, Help Wanted wins. With all of that said though, this was how fast you could get jump scared in every FNaF game, and it's finally time to roll the outro once and for all. Over the years, we've seen FNaF's gameplay go from a simple survival experience inside the office, all the way to a full-on franchise with over a dozen games that try out many different concepts and further extend the lore of the series. Now, what does any of this have to do with the jump scare speedrun I spent the last 40 minutes talking about? I have no idea. But I do appreciate you making it till the very end of this video, as it did take a couple of months to finish. It's crazy to think that these runs went from playing the game as usual in FNaF 3 to breaking the limits of Secret of the Mimic as to run into a microwave in world record time, yet still being slower than the entire top 5 combined. In fact, you could theoretically perform all of the skips I've previously mentioned to get jump scared in every FNaF in around 19 minutes, which is less than half the length of this video. Speaking of video, I think it's about time to finally wrap things up. I wanted to quickly thank the speedrunners who allowed me to use their footage in their respective games, as well as everyone else who helped me finish this project after so long. I'm genuinely really happy with how it turned out. If you enjoyed the video, I'd highly appreciate liking and subscribing to the channel, and you can also join my Discord server in the description. But with that out of the way, this was what I believe to be the fastest way to get jump scared in every single FNaF game. Thank you so much for watching once again, and until next time, see ya!